The galaxy had known war. It had known disasters. It had known the slow decay of dying stars and the violent rage of supernovas. But never had it known something like this. It started on the edge of the Zenfar Empire, a powerful civilization that had ruled its sector for thousands of years. One of their core worlds, Kalosvi, simply vanished. No explosion, no radiation, no wreckage, just gone. At first, the Galactic Council assumed it was an error, an instrument malfunction, a miscalculation. But then, more planets disappeared. Entire star systems wiped from existence without a trace. Panic spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The most advanced species, the ones who had mastered energy manipulation and faster-than-light travel, threw every resource into understanding the threat. But no matter how many probes they sent, how many ships they stationed at the borders, the result was always the same. Silence. No signal returned. No survivors escaped. The Kaveri, the galaxy's leading scientific race, declared the situation hopeless. "We are dealing with something beyond our understanding," their high scholar announced. "It is neither a war nor a disaster. It is a force of nature." And yet, nature had patterns. Nature had rules. This did not. The Galactic Council convened a crisis meeting, with every major species in attendance. The halls of the Great Concordia Station had never been so tense. Representatives from the Aelori Federation, the Threx Dominion, the Zilvera Coalition, and a dozen others debated endlessly. Some called for full evacuation of the outer colonies. Others argued for a last stand, even if they didn't know what they were fighting. And then, one voice broke through the noise. "We'll go." Every alien in the chamber turned toward the speaker. The representatives had almost forgotten they were there. These newcomers, these odd creatures from a chaotic world called Earth. The human ambassador, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, leaned forward. "We've spent thousands of years surviving disasters on our homeworld. We have experience studying anomalies. Let us investigate." Laughter rippled through the chamber. The Threx warlord, a massive reptilian creature, sneered. "You? Your kind comes from a death world. You barely survived your own evolution. What makes you think you can handle something that consumes entire star systems?" The human's lips curled into a small smile. "Because we're used to impossible odds." The council hesitated. Humanity was a young species, barely a century into space travel. Their technology was outdated compared to the great empires of the galaxy. And yet, they had a reputation. Stories of their resilience had spread. Their soldiers could fight in environments that would kill most species. Their engineers could repair failing starships with little more than scrap metal and determination. Their scientists had solved problems that had baffled more advanced civilizations. And now, they were volunteering to face a threat that no one else dared to confront. The Zilvera Prime Minister, a pale-skinned being with translucent wings, tapped her fingers on the table. "You understand that this is likely a one-way mission." The human nodded. "We understand. We go anyway." After a long silence, the council finally agreed. A single research vessel, the Horizon's Edge, was given to the humans. It was old and outdated by galactic standards, but it was enough. At least, that's what the council hoped. As the human crew boarded their ship, preparing to leave for the last known coordinates of the anomaly, the galaxy watched with quiet disbelief. The Kaveri scientist, who had declared the situation hopeless, whispered to a colleague, "They don't realize they're marching toward certain doom." But another voice, quieter and filled with something close to hope, replied, "Or maybe, just maybe, they'll prove us all wrong." With that, the Horizon's Edge disappeared into the blackness of space, carrying the fate of the galaxy with it. The Horizon's Edge moved through the endless void of space, its engines humming softly. The ship was old by galactic standards, but for the humans aboard, it was more than enough. They had survived on worse. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the vast darkness ahead. His crew, scientists, engineers, and a few military advisors, worked silently around him. There was tension in the air, but no fear. Fear was useless. Fear didn't solve problems. "We'll reach the last known location of Kalos V in 2 hours," said Dr. Lin Mei, the lead scientist. She was small but sharp-eyed, her mind working faster than most computers. Long-range scans still show nothing. Whatever destroyed those planets left no trace. Carter nodded. That was the terrifying part. Normally, destruction left signs. Radiation, debris, something. But the silent cataclysm, as some were calling it, erased everything as if those planets had never existed. The ship's navigator, Lieutenant Harris, frowned at the readings. "I'm like this. It's too empty. Even deep space isn't this quiet." Carter understood what he meant. Space was never truly silent. There were distant stars, cosmic dust, faint radiation waves. But here, nothing. It felt like stepping into a graveyard where even the ghosts had disappeared. "All right," Carter said. "We're not here to be scared. We're here to understand." "Dr. Lin, what's our plan?" Lin brought up a holographic display. "We start with simple probes. No high-energy signals, no complex technology. Just basic metal shells with cameras and motion sensors. We drop them in a wide pattern and watch." The crew nodded. It was an old trick, something humans had used for centuries. When faced with an unknown predator, don't make noise, just observe. 2 hours later, the horizon's edge reached the target location. The ship came to a halt. Ahead of them was nothing. No planets, no stars, just a massive empty void where Kalos V and its neighboring systems had once existed. A deep silence filled the bridge. Even the hum of the ship's systems felt quieter here. "Launch the probes," Carter ordered. Small metallic capsules shot out from the ship, drifting into the emptiness. The crew watched as data started coming in. Temperature readings, radiation levels, gravity fluctuations. Everything was normal. And that was the problem. "This doesn't make sense," Lin muttered. "If something erased these planets, we should see the effects. Energy waves, gravitational distortions, something." One of the engineers, Sergeant Valdez, narrowed his eyes. "Unless it's something we don't understand yet." Minutes passed, then an hour. The probes sent back nothing but static silence. Then, "Wait," Harris shouted. Probe 7 just vanished. Lin's hands flew across the console. It didn't explode. It didn't lose power. One moment it was there, and the next, nothing. Carter leaned forward. "Rewind the last transmission." The screen flickered, showing the probe's final moments. It was floating in the void, recording. And then, in a single frame, everything worked. The stars in the distance bent, stretched, then collapsed into darkness. The next frame was black. "What was that?" Valdez whispered. Lin rewound the footage, analyzing every detail. Then she looked up, her face pale. I think we're looking at a predator." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Explain," Carter said. Lin took a deep breath. "Look at the way space bends. It's not natural. This isn't just an energy field. It's something alive. And it's feeding." Silence fell over the bridge. Harris swallowed. "Feeding on what?" Lin hesitated before answering. "I think it's feeding on technology." Carter's jaw tightened. That would explain why the most advanced civilizations were vanishing. Their high-energy systems, their powerful ships, all of it acted like a beacon, attracting this thing. And when it found them, it consumed them. That means, Valdez started, then stopped, his eyes widening. "That means we're endangered just by being here." The crew realized it at the same moment. The horizon's edge, though old, still ran on fusion reactors, still emitted signals. If Lin's theory was right, they had already attracted attention. Shut down all non-essential systems, Carter barked. Now. The lights dimmed as the crew powered down everything unnecessary. The ship drifted, pretending to be nothing more than space debris. The tension was suffocating. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. Maybe it's gone, Harris whispered. Then the ship shook. The hull groaned, as if something unseen had brushed against it. The sensors flickered wildly. The crew barely had time to react before everything went dark. The horizon's edge was no longer alone. Something was here. The horizon's edge was drowning in darkness. The lights had died. The consoles flickered with static before shutting off completely. Even the emergency systems, designed to withstand any failure, were silent. For the first time since leaving Earth, the humans were completely blind in space. Captain Elias Carter gripped the armrest of his chair. His ears picked up only two things: his own heartbeat and the hushed breathing of his crew. Around him, the darkness felt heavier than it should. It was not the ordinary absence of light. It was deeper, like something hungry was swallowing even the faintest glow. "Status report," Carter ordered, forcing his voice to stay calm. No one responded at first. Then, a flickering tablet screen in the hands of Dr. Lin Mai provided a small glow. She had manually rebooted one of the backup devices, bypassing the ship's main systems. "Everything's down," she whispered. "Power, sensors, weapons, even life support is failing. It's like something is draining us." Sergeant Valdez, sitting near the communications console, clicked his emergency flashlight on. The dim beam barely cut through the darkness. "This thing, whatever it is, it didn't destroy us instantly. Why?" Lynn hesitated, then said, "It's studying us." A chill spread through the room. Carter clenched his jaw. "We need power." "Harris, try to reboot the core manually. No high-energy bursts. Keep it low and slow." Lieutenant Harris nodded and disappeared into the maintenance hatch. As he crawled through the tunnels, the rest of the crew stayed motionless, listening. The ship was eerily quiet, as if space itself had turned against them. Then, a low vibration passed through the ship's hull. Not an impact, not turbulence. A pulse. It was faint, almost gentle, but wrong. It felt like a living thing brushing against metal, as if the horizon's edge was no longer just a machine, but prey caught in a web. Valdez tightened his grip on his sidearm. "Captain, I don't like this." Carter didn't either. Minutes passed. The pulse returned, stronger this time. Lynn's tablet flickered, the screen struggling to stay active. "We need to understand what's happening," she muttered. "Maybe if we—" The ship jerked violently. Crew members were thrown from their seats. Sparks flew as emergency circuits overloaded. The darkness seemed to breathe around them. Then Harris' voice crackled through the emergency comms. "I got power back to one system. Captain, you need to see this." Lynn hooked her tablet into the rebooted screen. For a moment, static filled the display. Then the image cleared. What they saw made their blood run cold. The ship's external cameras were weak, but they had captured something. A shape. It was not a solid object. It had no defined form. Instead, it was a shifting, twisting mass of darkness. It pulsed, stretched, and contracted like a living organism. The way it moved was unnatural, like liquid and shadow mixed together. But the most terrifying part was not its shape. It was the way it responded to technology. Every time a system flickered back on, the entity reacted. It stretched toward the energy like a predator sensing movement. The moment the light dimmed, it recoiled slightly, as if frustrated. Lynn exhaled shakily. "It's not just feeding on technology. It's drawn to it." Valdez cursed under his breath. No wonder the most advanced species were the first to go. They probably never realized their own power was attracting it. Carter's mind raced. If this thing responded to energy, then their presence here was a trap. The more they tried to fight with machines, the more they would only lure it closer. "Shut everything down again," he said. Completely. Let's see what it does. Lynn hesitated. If we do that, we'll be completely blind. I know, Carter said. But if this thing hunts through energy, we need to play dead. With a reluctant nod, Lynn powered down the last active systems. The ship fell back into darkness. The crew waited. 5 minutes. Then something changed. The external cameras, even without power, captured a flicker. The entity was moving away. Slowly, but surely, it began drifting past them, as if losing interest. Lynn's eyes widened. It's working. Carter kept his voice steady. We wait longer. The crew remained in complete stillness, barely breathing. Outside, the entity pulsed one last time, then vanished into the abyss. For several long moments, no one moved. Then, Harris' voice broke the silence. Captain, we're still alive. A collective exhale filled the bridge. Relief mixed with lingering fear. Valdez shook his head. That was too close. Lynn, still watching the screen, swallowed. We survived. But we didn't stop it. It's still out there. Still hunting. Carter nodded grimly. And now, we know how it hunts. He looked at his crew, determination burning in his eyes. That means we can fight back. The horizon's edge floated silently in the void, its systems cold and lifeless. Every crew member sat in complete stillness, afraid that even the smallest movement might bring the nightmare back. Captain Elias Carter kept his gaze locked on the dark screen in front of him. The creature, if it could even be called that, had drifted away. But Carter knew it was still out there, hunting, waiting for its next target. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Lin Mai whispered, I think it's gone. The crew remained quiet for a few more moments, listening to the unnatural silence. Then, Sergeant Valdez exhaled sharply. We need a plan. That thing just erased entire planets like they were never there. We barely survived by shutting everything off. What happens when we need power again? Carter leaned forward. We figure out what this thing is. We find its weakness. Lynn frowned. Captain, we don't even know what we're dealing with. It's not a life form in any way we understand. It moves like a shadow but reacts to energy. If it can consume entire star systems, how can we possibly fight it? Carter glanced at the screen, thinking. Everything in the universe follows rules, even predators. We survived because we played dead. That means it's not all-powerful. It relies on something to detect its prey. Harris, the navigator, nodded slowly. If it only attacks when it senses energy, maybe it doesn't see the way we do. Lynn's eyes widened. You're right. It doesn't see light, mass, or heat. It follows energy signatures. The more advanced the technology, the stronger the signal. Valdez crossed his arms. That explains why the powerful empires disappeared first. Their high-tech civilizations must have been like a feast for this thing. Carter sat back. Then that means primitive tech might go unnoticed. A silence fell over the group as an idea formed. Harris was the first to speak. You're thinking of using old technology, aren't you? Carter nodded. If we create a trap using low-tech bait, we might be able to study it. Maybe even find a weakness. Lynn hesitated. Captain, that's risky. Carter met her gaze, so is waiting for it to come back. The crew exchanged looks. No one liked the idea, but they all knew the truth. If they didn't act, the galaxy was doomed. Building the bait, the humans worked quickly but carefully. They couldn't risk using their ship's main systems, so everything had to be done manually. Lynn and her team repurposed old mechanical probes, simple devices with no advanced energy signatures. They had originally been meant for asteroid mining, but now they would serve a new purpose. We'll set these probes to release a small energy burst at different intervals, Lynn explained. The creature will sense it, but since the signal is weak, it won't rush in all at once. Valdez smirked. Like fishing, but with a monster instead of a fish. Carter checked the timer. All right, we launch in 5 minutes. Waiting in the dark. The probes were ejected into space, each one positioned at a safe distance from the horizon's edge. The crew powered down the ship again, waiting. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. The probes drifted quietly. Then, the first probe vanished. It didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It was just gone. Lynn's tablet, which was running on minimal power, flickered with the last recorded image. The dark mass had returned. It had stretched toward the probe, swallowing it in an instant. Confirmed, Lynn whispered. It moves exactly when an energy source appears. Another probe activated, releasing a faint burst of power. The creature reacted instantly, flowing toward it like a shadow reaching for the light. But something strange happened. The movement. Harris whispered. It's not random. Carter narrowed his eyes. What do you see? Harris pointed at the screen. It's responding like a hunting animal, not just a mindless force. Look at the way it moves. It's stalking. The realization sent a shiver down Carter's spine. If this thing had instincts, it could be outmaneuvered. If it had instincts, it could make mistakes. Lynn suddenly gasped. Wait, look. It hesitated before attacking the second probe. Why? The crew watched closely. The creature seemed slower, less aggressive than before. Valdez frowned. Maybe it's cautious. Maybe it knows some things could be a threat. Carter's mind raced. If the entity had fears, they could exploit them. We need to test this, he said. We need to build something that it sees as dangerous. Lynn thought for a moment. What if we create a power source that flares unpredictably? If it can't understand the pattern, it might hesitate. Carter nodded. Do it. And make sure it's something we can detonate remotely. Just in case. A deadly experiment. The crew worked through the next few hours, assembling a new type of probe. Instead of a steady energy signal, this one would spike randomly, sometimes weak, sometimes powerful. When they finally launched it, the creature returned almost immediately. It rushed toward the energy, then suddenly stopped. The dark mass twisted, pulsing in strange patterns, as if confused. Lynn's eyes widened. It's hesitating. Carter felt a surge of hope. That means it's not invincible. It has limits. The creature lingered for a long moment. Then, slowly, it backed away, disappearing into the void once more. A heavy silence filled the bridge. Valdez let out a slow breath. Captain, we just scared off something that eats planets. Lynn was still staring at the screen, her mind racing. If we can figure out why it hesitated, we might be able to drive it away completely. Carter clenched his fist. They had just taken the first step toward fighting back. He turned to his crew, determination burning in his eyes. Now we find a way to stop it for good. The crew of the Horizon's Edge watched in silence as the dark entity faded back into the abyss. It had hesitated. That meant it was not all-powerful. It had limits, and that meant it could be defeated. Captain Elias Carter clenched his fist. We have its attention. Now, we need to find its weakness. Dr. Linmai was already analyzing the data from their last experiment. The probe's unpredictable energy patterns confused it. That suggests it doesn't just absorb power, it relies on patterns to track its prey. Sergeant Valdez leaned forward. So if it can't predict something, it gets cautious. Exactly, Lynn confirmed. It expects a steady energy source, like a ship or a planet's power grid. But when the energy becomes chaotic, it hesitates. Harris, the navigator, frowned. That's useful, but it doesn't tell us how to stop it. Carter exhaled. We need to push it further. See how far we can make it retreat. Setting the next trap. The crew worked tirelessly to design a new kind of bait. Instead of a simple probe, they built something more advanced. A decoy ship with an erratic power core. We'll send this out and let it simulate a malfunctioning vessel, Carter explained. If the creature still hesitates, we know we're on the right path. Valdez smirked. And if it doesn't? Carter's eyes darkened. Then we'll have a very short experiment. The decoy ship was released into the void, drifting like a wounded prey animal. The crew powered down their own systems once again, waiting in the cold silence. Minutes passed. Then, the darkness moved. The entity reappeared, slowly slithering toward the decoy. It paused, its form shifting uncertainly. Lynn's hands trembled as she whispered, "It's thinking." Carter watched intently. "Come on, show us what you fear." Then, something unexpected happened. The entity didn't consume the decoy. It recoiled, just slightly, but enough for everyone to see. It pulsed, twisting like a living shadow, then backed away completely. The bridge filled with stunned silence. Harris was the first to speak. It's leaving." Lynn's mind raced. "This proves it. It doesn't just hunt blindly. It's afraid of unstable energy." Carter's expression hardened. "That means we can turn that fear into a weapon." A bold plan. Back on the horizon's edge, the crew gathered to discuss their next move. They had discovered something valuable. The creature avoided chaotic energy. But why? Lynn was deep in thought. I think it's because the entity needs stable energy to feed. Unstable power might be dangerous to it." Carter nodded. "If that's true, then we need to create the most unstable energy source possible." Harris's eyes widened. "You're talking about a controlled overload." "Yes," Carter said. "We build a massive energy spike, something too chaotic for it to absorb. If we do it right, it won't just scare it away. It might hurt it." Valdez grinned. "I like this plan. Building the weapon." The crew began modifying an old fusion core, making it as unstable as possible. Normally, such a device would be considered dangerous. But this time, that was exactly what they needed. Lynn fine-tuned the power fluctuations. This will create an unpredictable surge. If the creature tries to absorb it, it might overload and disrupt its form. Valdez prepped the deployment system. "This thing better work, or we're just making a fancy light show." Carter placed a hand on the control panel. "We launch it at the first sign of movement." Everyone ready. The crew nodded. The moment of truth had arrived. The final test. The modified energy core was released into space. It drifted, pulsing erratically. Seconds later, the darkness returned. The entity rushed toward the core, but then it froze. The pulsing energy confused it, twisting through the void like a wild storm. The creature hesitated, its form rippling. Then, it tried to absorb the energy. The moment it made contact, the core detonated in a pulse of chaotic energy. The entity screamed, not with sound, but through the vibrations in space. Its shadowy form twisted violently, as if in agony. The darkness shrank, pulling away like a wounded animal. The bridge erupted in cheers. "It's working," Lynn shouted. "It can't handle chaotic energy." Carter's eyes remained locked on the screen. "Then we just found the galaxy's only defense against this thing." The creature, injured and weakened, fled into the void, disappearing into the unknown. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had struck back. For the first time, the galaxy had hope. The crew of the Horizon's Edge watched as the dark entity retreated, its form twisting and flickering. Their chaotic energy weapon had worked. It had actually hurt the creature. But Captain Elias Carter knew the battle wasn't over. "It's wounded," he said, eyes locked on the screen. "But not gone." Dr. Lin May nodded. "We need to finish what we started. If we let it recover, it'll learn from this. Next time, it might not be afraid." Sergeant Valdez smirked. "Then we hit it harder before it gets the chance." Carter turned to the crew. "We need to make sure the rest of the galaxy knows about this. If we can spread this knowledge, we might stand a chance." Navigator Harris frowned. "The problem is, most of the advanced civilizations are already gone. Their ships, their defenses, everything's been wiped out. Who's left to fight?" Silence filled the bridge. The question lingered in the air. Then Lynn spoke, her voice steady. "There's us, spreading the word." The humans had always been seen as deathworlders, too reckless, too wild, too chaotic for the rest of the galaxy. Now that chaos had become the galaxy's only hope. Carter activated the ship's emergency beacon. They couldn't use normal communication channels. The entity would sense the energy. But old technology, weak signals, those might still work. Valdez tapped the controls, sending out a low-tech distress signal on all frequencies. If anyone's still alive, they'll hear it. Lynn adjusted the message. "We have to keep it short. The entity fears chaotic energy. Use unstable power sources to drive it back." The signal was sent. Now, all they could do was wait. A desperate alliance. Hours passed. The crew remained on edge, watching the sensors for any sign of movement, either from the entity or from survivors. Then, a reply came. A weak signal, barely readable, but it was there. Carter quickly played the message. "This is the Tazrin Resistance. We heard your message. We thought we were the only ones left." Lynn's eyes widened. The Tazrin, the reptilian empire, they were one of the first to fall. Valdez grinned. "Looks like they weren't completely wiped out." Carter responded. "Horizon's edge here. We found a way to hurt the entity. If we work together, we can fight back." A pause. Then the reply came. "Meet us at the coordinates we're sending. We don't have much left, but we'll stand with you." Carter turned to his crew. "Looks like we're not alone after all." Preparing for war. The Horizon's edge traveled through the darkened remains of the galaxy, heading toward the rendezvous point. The crew remained tense. Then the fleet appeared, or rather, what was left of it. Ships of all shapes and sizes drifted in space, some barely functional, others patched together from scrap. The survivors had nothing left to lose. The Tazrin leader, Commander Accelerath, appeared on the comms. His reptilian face was scared, his voice heavy. "We were once an empire. Now we are survivors. But if you speak the truth, Deathworlders, we will fight beside you." Carter nodded. "We'll show you how to build the weapons. We drive it back together." Lynn added, "We don't need advanced tech, just chaos. The more unpredictable our energy signatures, the harder it will be for the entity to attack us." Accelerath narrowed his eyes. "Then let's make this monster afraid of us." The final plan. The survivors worked fast, modifying their ships with unstable power cores. They couldn't destroy the entity outright, but they could push it away, weaken it, and force it to retreat permanently. Harris looked at the Ragdig fleet. "This is either the smartest or the craziest thing we've ever done." Valdez grinned. "Why not both?" Carter stood at the command console, his voice strong. "This thing took everything from us. Now we fight back. For the fallen. For the survivors. For the future." The ships powered up, their chaotic energy signals spreading through space. The bait had been set. Now they just had to wait for the monster to return. In the cold void of space, the last remnants of the galaxy's civilizations had gathered. Humans, Tazrin, Vorani, and even the fragile winged Eldari. They had once feared the humans' chaotic nature, but now, that chaos was their greatest weapon. On board the Horizon's edge, Captain Elias Carter watched the scanners. The bait had been set. Ships with unstable power cores pulsed unpredictably, their energy signatures flickering like a wildfire. Sergeant Valdez gripped his controls. "The fleet's ready. Now we wait." Navigator Harris exhaled. "It'll come. It always does." Then, the darkness moved. A massive shadow slithered across the void, its form shifting like liquid. It had sensed the energy, drawn to the chaotic signatures, yet it hesitated. The last battle had taught it pain. But hunger overpowered fear. It lunged forward. "The fight begins." The Horizon's edge led the charge. Carter's voice was steady as he commanded, "Activate the disruption fields. Unleash the chaos. Across the fleet, ships began overloading their cores, releasing erratic pulses of energy. The void shimmered with unstable power, unpredictable waves distorting the entity's form. The creature screamed, a vibration that shook every ship. "It's working." Lin Mei shouted, scanning the readings. "It can't stabilize itself." The entity writhed, its tendrils flickering as it tried to consume the energy, but the chaotic nature of the attacks made it weaker, not stronger. Commander Xel'Arath of the Tazrin roared through the comms. "Keep pushing. Don't let it recover." The fleet pressed forward, bombarding the entity with unstable surges. The creature shrank, its form rippling like a storm about to collapse. Then, it fought back. The struggle for survival. A tendril of darkness lashed out, engulfing one of the Vorini ships. The crew had no time to react. Within seconds, their vessel vanished, absorbed into the abyss. The fleet trembled. Fear crept in. "It's adapting," Lin warned. "We need more chaos." Carter clenched his jaw. "Then we give it everything." Valdez slammed the controls, overloading our own core. "This ship's going to burn hot." The horizon's edge surged forward, its engines spiking into dangerous levels. The energy became wild, uncontrollable, and the entity screamed again, pulling away. Other ships followed suit, pushing their power beyond safe limits. The void exploded with chaotic energy. The entity twisted in agony. Harris grinned. "We're hurting it. It's breaking apart." The final blow. Lynn's hands trembled as she stared at the data. "Captain, if we push just a little more, we can end this." But Carter didn't need her to finish. He knew this much chaos could destroy them, too. He looked at his crew, his family. They nodded. No words were needed. "Full power," Carter ordered. "For everyone who's gone. For the galaxy." The fleet unleashed everything. Unstable energy cascaded through space, colliding into the entity like a raging storm. The creature convulsed, its tendrils snapping as it collapsed in on itself. Its form, once unstoppable, now shattered under the force of pure chaos. It let out one final scream, then vanished. Victory and hope. Silence fell over the battlefield. The entity was gone. For the first time in a long while, the void was still. The survivors looked at each other, exhausted but alive. Commander Xel'Arath's voice came through the comms, filled with awe and disbelief. "It's over." Lynn wiped her eyes. "We did it. We actually did it." Valdez let out a breathless laugh. "Guess chaos really does win in the end." Carter sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The galaxy had been on the edge of extinction, and yet, through the very thing that had made humanity an outsider, their unpredictability, their chaos, their stubborn refusal to die, they had become its saviors. "We're still here," he said quietly. Harris smiled. "Yeah, and now, we rebuild." As the battered fleet drifted through the endless stars, the last survivors of a broken galaxy knew one thing for sure: the darkness was gone, and life would rise again.